Join us as we transform this chaos into a functional and beautiful sewing space. My name is Yvette and I am the co-founder of the sewing organiser at Stash Hub, which I run with my husband Doug. We've been up to something a little different this week, so we thought we'd take you along for the journey and let you know what we've discovered when organising someone else's stash for them. Our mission at Stash Hub is to help the sewing community fall in love with their sewing stash. So we were approached by a family member about helping them to organise their sewing stash. So we thought we'd give it a go, and we would also take you along with us on the journey to let you know what we discovered whilst organising someone else's stash. So before we got into the organising, we wanted to establish the aims and expectations for the outcome of the organising. And I think that is a really important thing to do with any project, to know what you're aiming for, because it helps motivate you through the process, and it also helps guide what you're actually going to do if you know what you want it to look and function like at the end. So we said, you know, what's the situation now and what do you want it to be like? So the main aim basically was to be able to start sewing again. So the current state of their stash means that they're not able to access their fabrics or patterns, which makes it very difficult to actually get any sewing done because it's not very motivating or very easy to get going on a project. And then another aim was to find out what there actually is and have more of awareness of what's in the stash. So that's where Stash Hub comes in. So we said, yeah, we'll help you catalogue everything in Stash Hub. So even after it's sorted out, you will be able to just check on the app how much of each fabric you've got and what you have available when you want to get going on some sewing projects. We talked to Doug's aunt and she said that she's got a lot of stuff, but she doesn't know what she's got. And the way that it's currently stored, just like in bags in the loft, means it's not accessible. So she's actually not able to do any sewing right now.
Yeah, and she was saying that she wants to do loads of different crafts. I mean, she's very talented, sewing, lino cutting, quilting, curtains, all that sort of stuff, upholstery. So it wasn't like, there's not like a clear brief to get rid of everything. I think we really just need to know what there is to begin with, and she needs to know what there is.
And I think it was helpful as well knowing that Doug's aunt was interested in doing lots of different things with fabrics, so sort of patchwork, potentially dressmaking, curtain making, upholstery, all kinds of different things. So that already kind of got my brain whirring, thinking, okay, so we're going to need different sections for the different types of fabric to make it easy to grab what you need when you're doing the different types of sewing.
Yeah, so it's less about organising was kind of more about like the use case as opposed to by colour or fabric type.
Yeah, and I think that is an important thing to consider when you are organising your stash, to know like what you want to do and how you want to be able to use your stash, because that will inform how you want to organise it. So that was the main aim of the organisation process, to find out what there is, make everything more accessible and encourage them to get sewing again. So that was quite good to know what the aims were to help us get motivated. So this is the before. Most fabrics are in sacks in the loft, so yeah, not accessible, not easy to know what's in there, and there was kind of a mixture of different stuff in each bag as well. There was a few patterns knocking about in the loft as well, and then some more fabrics in another drawer, a few things on rolls, and a few things scattered about the place. So as we discussed in the kind of aims section, not very accessible and very easy to get going with a project. So on day one, we decided to focus on fabrics. So we got all the bags of fabrics down from the loft and from other places around the house, brought them all into one room so that we could kind of get a measure of what there was and get started with the organising. So we had some mesh baskets that we could organise things into. So they had a home to go into after being sorted out of the bags. And there was also the drawer that we took everything out of as well. So we kind of had a little production line going. So we got the fabrics out of the bags and we prioritised the longer lengths of fabrics as well, so that we didn't kind of get bogged down in trying to sort out lots of little scraps. So we had one person measuring the fabrics, and then Doug was taking photos and uploading the fabrics to Stash Hub with the information to make them filterable and easy to find. And then I was folding the fabrics, and my aim with the folding of the fabrics was to keep every fabric visible in its drawer or basket. So I folded them in kind of the Marie Kondo style, where they kind of stand on their end, so you can see all of the edges of all the fabrics. And I think that makes it so much easier to know what you've got at a glance and be able to easily pull the fabric that you want to use without disrupting all the rest of the fabrics. So that's how I store my fabrics as well, kind of folded up and then with the ends sticking out. So my fabrics were folded onto comic book boards, and I did bring some comic book boards with us for this stash organisation, but they weren't the right size for the containers that we had, but it wasn't essential. So this method of folding works better for more structured fabrics like cottons. So there were a few silks and different fabrics that didn't quite want to be folded that way, so they had to be folded and laid flat. But on the whole, I tried to keep everything folded so that it was visible, and Doug also recorded the location for all the fabrics in Stash Hub, because that was one of the priorities that was set out in the aims, was to know what we had and where it was. So this is the Stash Hub stats at the end of day one. We were able to catalogue 69 fabrics in just a few hours, really. So yeah, hopefully that's motivating if you are dragging your heels getting started with Stash Hub. Once you get into it, and especially if you've got some more people to help as well, it really doesn't take that long. So we catalogued 69 fabrics, over 140 meters, and I think the meterage does really add up quite quickly. It always seems more when you look at the total number of meters. So I'll put in some shots of how the fabrics were organised by the end of day one. So what I had decided to do was keep the fabrics for different crafts separate. So Doug's aunt does all kinds of different crafts, so dressmaking, patchwork, upholstery. So there were different types of fabric that were appropriate for different crafts. So with the mesh baskets, we set up different baskets for different types of fabric, so that it would be easier to just check, for example, oh, I want to make a curtain, let's see what we've got in the upholstery baskets. So I thought it would be fun to show you some of the most exciting fabrics that we saw, because in her collection there were some really good gems, especially the silks from Thailand and also some really fun embroidered fabrics as well. So yeah, I really hope that Doug's aunt is feeling more inspired to sew after rediscovering these fabrics, because there were some real gems in there, and I think knowing that you've got them and where they are is so much more motivating to get going with those projects. So on to day two, we decided to focus more on the sewing patterns for day two. So we did basically the same approach as what we did for the fabrics. We just got all of the patterns out from the loft, took them all to one room, spread them all out on the table so that we could see them. And then because with the patterns there wasn't any measuring required, Doug and I just took a stack of patterns each, took photos of the front covers and then just added them into Stash Hub. And then in terms of the physical organisation, we had a couple of baskets which were the perfect size for the standard commercial patterns. And then we divided the patterns into sections, so according to garment types for the women's patterns, which was the majority of patterns, so dresses, tops, bottoms, and then there was also a section for kids, section for men, just to make it really easy to find. And then within those sections we organised the patterns by their number, so the lowest number at the start and then the higher numbers at the back, so that you can check on Stash Hub which basket it's in, and then you can just search through the numbers. So we were quite pleased with that approach. There wasn't a huge pattern stash, but these are the stats at the end of day one. So I think we did 89 patterns, and during this process as well we also found the sort of odd pattern pieces and matched them up with the pattern envelopes that they were supposed to live in, or got rid of bits of patterns that didn't have the rest of the pattern anywhere to be found. So that was quite good, and we discovered some quite fun patterns during that process as well. So that was our approach with organising the patterns. And then day 3, it was time to tackle some of the notions. So the main thing that we helped with was the threads. So I took a photo of each sewing thread against a white background to try and get the colours to come out more accurately, and then I bulk uploaded them into Stash Hub, and then we went through and tagged each thread with the colour, named it, and added the Gutermann thread number. So having that on Stash Hub is really handy for if you're out shopping, for example, and you're buying a fabric, you think maybe I'll get the matching thread. You can just quickly check if you've already got that thread in your stash. And then really satisfyingly, I organised the threads in colour order as well, which I think it just looks so good, and it makes it easier then to compare the similar colours of thread and pick out the best one for your fabric. Because personally I think there's nothing more satisfying than a beautifully matched thread to your fabric. And then the rest of the notions, so for example zips, fasteners, buttons, ribbons, trims, all that sort of stuff was organised into different boxes for each type, and those were going to be stored on a shelf in the crafting room. So one of the things that we found actually really useful about this whole process is that it helped put us in the mindset of somebody who is brand new to Stash Hub but already has quite a large existing stash, and they want to get that uploaded to Stash Hub. So where Doug codes the Stash Hub app, he's obviously very familiar with the app, but he hasn't used the app a lot himself. Obviously he's done testing on the app to make sure that our updates work and that it all functions properly, but he hasn't actually used it as a sewist would use it to catalogue their stash. So Doug did most of the inputting into Stash Hub, and it was really interesting for both of us really to find out what the snagging points of the process were, which parts of Stash Hub were maybe not optimal for uploading your stash, and think about things that we could do to improve the process for you. So I thought it would be fun to get Doug to come on and talk about this, since he's the expert and he's the one who is going to do the updates to Stash Hub to make it better. So let's get Doug on and find out what he thought of the process of uploading a large existing stash into Stash Hub.
I'm Doug, and I've been coding the Stash Hub app for over 2.5 years now. Although I've used the app in a lot, but it's only in like short bursts, so using it for a continued amount of time I have found some areas which could definitely be improved. For example, something minor like when you click on a field and it sort of like, if it's below the virtual keyboard, that's kind of annoying. So I've now been able to make an update where it will now sort of scroll all the way to the top, it'll be in focus, and also if it's a sort of field with suggestions, they'll also all be in view. And something small like that doesn't make a big difference if you use it for 20 seconds, but when you're using it for hours on end, it can have a really big impact on the user experience. It really was a lot of effort to go through my aunt's stash and log it all and tidy it up and all that, but I also feel very confident it is now in a state where she can make use of it. Although while using the app I did find a few niggles, overall it was actually really quite enjoyable to use, and I'm glad we had it for sorting out my aunt's stash.
Alright, so I know this is the bit that you've all been dying for, the after, the most satisfying part of the process. So we successfully removed everything from the loft, so there's no more sewing things in the loft anymore, which is great because that is not the most accessible place to store everything. We managed to get everything into one room, which is the guest room / craft room, which I'm sure a lot of sewists with a guest room can relate to. And we've got these beautifully organised mesh drawers with different types of fabric in, so you can get out the appropriate drawer for whether it's the upholstery project you need to do, a bit of dressmaking, and then obviously I've done some kind of rough colour coding as well. So it's a very personal process organising a stash, and it's up to you how you organise it. So we didn't go like too hard into organising by fibre type because a lot of the fabrics we didn't know the exact composition, so we more focused on the usage of that fabric. Is this a dressmaking fabric, or is it an upholstery fabric, or is it a small piece for patchwork? We kind of decided it where we would store things based on their function, and I think that's going to work really well for Doug's aunt because of the different crafts that she does. And I think having everything visible is going to be really helpful as well, and having everything in one room that can also be used to actually do the crafting is going to be really helpful as well. So let's just recap the aims and see if we manage to achieve them during our sorting out process. So the original aims were to know what everything is, make everything more accessible, and get inspired to sew again. So for knowing what everything is, I think we definitely achieved that. Obviously during the process we got everything out and had a look at it, so that's really helpful for knowing what there is and is a great way to reconnect with your stash. And we also added everything into Stash Hub, so it's just really easy now to check what there is. Then the next part was to make everything more accessible, and I think even just getting everything out of the loft and into the crafting room has achieved that, but I think we've gone further than that by taking everything out of the bags where you can't see what there is and is all mixed together, by sorting everything into type according to how it's going to be used, and then sorting everything kind of by colour as well, just to make it easier to find everything and get everything out, so nothing is now like stuffed in a drawer or at the bottom somewhere. So I think that's definitely been achieved, making things more accessible, so really pleased with that. And then the third point on the aims was getting inspired to sew again. So obviously that's up to Doug's aunt, but I think she was definitely sounding more positive about sewing after the process, talking about making some pajamas for her grandkids, which was really cute and really exciting. So yeah, that remains to be seen how much sewing gets done, but I think it's definitely going to be easier to get started with that now that the sewing space is organised than it was when everything was in the loft. So I hope that you guys have enjoyed joining us for this process and seeing little snippets along the way. Hopefully this will inspire you to get your teeth into organise your own sewing stashes as well. Remember that you don't have to do everything at once. You can just do as much as you can in an hour or however much time you've got spare, and think about what you want to achieve before you start doing it to help you focus and to get excited about how your sewing space is going to improve. So thanks so much for joining us. Do check out the links in the description if you want to download Stash Hub or follow us on Instagram. And we hope this helps you fall in love with your stash. Bye.